right, let's rock and roll.
Okay.
My name is Lawrence Rosenberg, and this is the Alpha Human Podcast. Our guest today is Dr. Gabrielle Lyon. Dr. Lyon is an osteopathic physician specializing in functional and muscle-centric medicine, as well as brain and thyroid health, longevity, and mitigating disease. Dr. Lyon has a practice in New York City where she leverages evidence-based medicine and cutting-edge science to restore metabolism, balance hormones, and optimize body composition. And she treats patients from all walks of life, ranging from sarcopenic individuals that want to improve muscle and age independently, to overweight and pre-diabetic adults who need to improve lean body mass. Dr. Lyon's knowledge and programs are so powerful, in fact, that she's even sought after by elite military operators such as the Navy SEALs, Green Berets, Army Rangers, and she partners with the Task Force Dagger Special Operations Foundation on their health initiative program. Dr. Lyon was also a professional fitness model and a nationally ranked figure competitor and has published articles in Muscle and Fitness, Women's Health, Men's Health, and Harper's Bazaar. So she doesn't just understand the science or talk the talk. She actually walks the walk when it comes to being in top physical and mental condition. Dr. Lyon, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I love that intro. Listen, they don't call this the Beta Human Podcast, right?
That's
and
right.
I'm sure that's seriously terrible mom joke, but I'm sure you've heard that joke before.
I hear all kinds of alpha jokes. And let me tell you something. It's great to have you. Thank you so much for doing the show. You know, as I was mentioning before we got started, I've interviewed a lot of people in the keto and carnivore community. I've interviewed a lot of individuals in the special operations community, and somehow all roads lead to you, Dr. Lyon. There are a lot of people talking about the great work that you do, and I'm excited to have this chance to discuss with you everything that you've become an expert in and that you're helping people with. So,
great. Let's do it.
I'd love to start with just the concept for the uninitiated of functional medicine.
Sure. So the concept of functional medicine is actually root cause medicine. And this is not symptom-based approach, which is typically what Western medicine is. So you have high blood pressure, you'll get a blood pressure medication. You have low thyroid, you're going to get thyroid medication. What functional medicine is the root. It's what is underneath. And as it relates to functional medicine, that's truly where healing begins, right? I mean, it's all at the underbelly. And actually, my form of medicine that I practice, I founded the Institute for Muscle-Centric Medicine. And muscle-centric medicine is this concept that muscle is the largest organ in the body. And if you take a step back and think about it, we often think about skeletal muscle as it relates to just looking good in a bikini or looking good naked, but it's so much more than that. It's actually an endocrine organ. And I believe that the reason we are so grossly ineffective and inefficient at treating disease is because we have the whole paradigm wrong. We are not over fat. We are under muscled, actually, as a society.
That's radical thinking. What else is radical thinking? What you just mentioned, root cause, root cause medicine. Everyone that I know that has had issues and has seen physicians, and I mean top physicians at some of the great hospitals around the country for all manner of chronic disease and disabilities.
Yeah.
No one looks at the root cause.
Yeah, it's so funny you say that. I was thinking about that today, and there's a group of physicians that do, there's a growing group of physicians that do functional medicine, but I was thinking about this very concept today that where did physicians lose the conversation? Because before there was this craft of medicine, there was this relationship establishment, there was outside of the box thinking. And I think over the centuries and decades, I don't know how long there's been doctors, but it's been a really long time that doctors are now thinking more in algorithms as opposed to thinking about different approaches and different ways that illness manifests. And I think it's a huge disservice.
Yeah. And, you've mentioned something really interesting, this concept of muscle being the organ of longevity. You said muscle is an organ.
Mhm.
I've heard you say it's the organ of longevity.
Mhm.
Um, how so? Because first
Yeah.
off, most people are not even aware that muscle is an organ.
Right, right. And again, this goes to our failure of thinking, the way in which we have focused so much on fat tissue. It's all about, losing weight and Jenny Craig and Weight Watchers. And listen, there's a lot of money and a lot of narrative around being overweight and over fat. But with that, there's been a blind side. It's that we've been focusing completely on the wrong paradigm. And so because of that, the knowledge of skeletal muscle in all other domains other than resistance training remains elusive, largely elusive to individuals. So the concept that muscle is an endocrine organ, and when you contract it and when it is healthy, it is not only metabolically robust, it is responsible for a large part of where glucose disposal goes. And we hear all about diabetes and Alzheimer's and cardiovascular disease. These diseases are not diseases of adipose tissue. They are diseases of skeletal muscle first. Defects in the skeletal muscle happen first.
So how did you come to focus on this area of medicine, which is so highly, I guess, overlooked?
Yeah. There was a moment in time that a light bulb went off, right? My husband would like to think that there were more than one light bulb, but for argument's sakes, there was a light bulb that went off. I was in my fellowship. So I did a fellowship at Washington University in St. Louis in nutritional sciences, obesity medicine, and geriatrics. The clinical responsibilities were through geriatrics, and I ran an obesity medicine clinic for 2 years. And then the research based was looking at obesity and the interface of brain function. You spend a lot of time doing research. You go very early in the morning and you stay for, when I say early, I mean 4 a.m. And then
Wow.
you stay and your clinical duties start at 9. And then you go back to the hospital to finish whatever that you need to finish as it relates to cognitive function. And you get to know the patients or the study participants very well. And there was one woman, and she was in her late 40s, early 50s. She was a mother of 3 children. And she always put her health and wellness last. And at the time, the study we were looking at was the interface between midlife weight gain, obesity, and brain volume and brain function. And I imaged her brain, and she had flattening of her anatomy. She had flattening of her gray matter. And I knew 10 years, 20 years later, there was a possibility she was going to really struggle to remember her children's names.
Wow.
Man. And I felt so bad. I felt that as a system, we failed her. And I felt it so deeply that at that moment, I realized we were totally amiss and we were looking at the wrong tissue, and that whatever the narrative surrounding these things that was feeding the individual, no pun intended, but truly feeding them, was ruining their lives. It was ruining their lives. And that's where muscle-centric medicine was born.
Okay. So that's a great segue to get into,
but it's all true.
I mean, that's an incredible epiphany. And to have a chance to kind of decide to focus your life on how you can help individuals that will otherwise be lost. And so many are lost within our health industrial complex, right?
And it starts in your 30s. So we miss it. We miss it if we're not, there's the whole vegan push. There's the whole don't eat red meat, don't eat animal products. This whole narrative will destroy Americans. It'll destroy it. I've seen it because I have worked in nursing homes and worked on the other end of the spectrum to see what these choices and decisions, their ultimate outcome, their trajectory. It's predictable.
Okay. So, all right, let's start to look at that, because, we talk about the muscle being the organ of longevity.
Yeah.
But what we're taught is that the organ of longevity is the heart and the cardiovascular system. And to keep the heart healthy, I need to eat a diet low in fat, low in cholesterol, and rich in grains, fruits, and vegetables. Ideally, I should become a vegan. However, you say, and I'm going to quote you, Dr. Lyon, from an article you wrote for the Orlando Sentinel. So, quote, "We've been embracing plant-based diets for decades, and they're killing us."
Right.
How so?
I mean, the majority of us already eat a plant-based diet. 70% of our calories already come from vegetable oils, processed carbs. We're already eating a plant-based diet, and look where it got us. And this is just from the NHANES data set. It's not even my opinion. We as Americans are already on a plant-based diet. We eat 70% of our calories from plant-based foods. We eat 30% of our calories from animal-based products, whether it's beef or bison or dairy. And we get nearly 100% of our protein from them. We get our calcium, we get our bioavailable iron, B vitamins, zinc, selenium. The majority of our bioavailable nutrients come from that small 30%. And you mentioned heart disease. We have 40 million people on statins. People still believe that narrative that cholesterol, eating dietary cholesterol is bad for blood level cholesterol. That's not what the data shows. That's archaic. The body has a set point of, the body has a natural set point of cholesterol. And if you really are worried about triglycerides, you don't want to overconsume carbohydrates and insulin, or you're not consuming insulins, but you don't want to overconsume carbohydrates and push high levels of insulin. That's the real narrative, but the real narrative doesn't actually sell statins. And so if you don't sell statins, then pharma doesn't make any money. And if pharma doesn't make any money, then who is going to supply the American Heart Association with funding? It's a cycle.
Right. So we talk about this, this narrative of cholesterol. I mean, even to this day, if I tell my father-in-law who recently passed about, the fact that don't worry about your cholesterol. It's not the cholesterol, right? Let's look at your triglyceride, ratio to HDL, right? Is it 3-to-1? Is it 2-to-1? Is it 1-to-1? Where's that ratio? What does that look like? And correct me if I'm wrong, but it's not like there's any drugs to lower triglycerides, right?
Well, I mean, I think the bigger question is, so, we could go kind of off on this tangent of cholesterol. And I think I think it would be a mistake for us, because I think that, again, when you think about what we are being taught, whether it's we should go more plant-based, it's totally inappropriate. Whether we should worry about cholesterol, as it relates to foods, that's totally wrong. As it relates to medication, it totally depends on the person. It depends on their calcium score. There's a whole bunch of other things, their family history, their carotid intermedial thickness. There's a whole slew of things that I would look at. And I think that there's a genetic component, and you can address the genetics. Some people have very strong, genetic history of cardiovascular disease. Those guys need to be treated. But for the majority of people, things are preventable. And the way in which it is prevented, it's through optimizing body composition. And the way in which you optimize body composition when you are young, you're largely driven by hormones. And when I say hormones, I'm not talking about testosterone, which in fact does happen, but you're driven by insulin. You're driven by insulin, you are driven by other growth hormones. And then what happens is the system changes. You no longer need to be driven by insulin, and you don't want to be. And hormones begin to taper off. And whether that's in your 30s or 40s, depending on the lifestyle that you're living, it's at that moment that you can no longer train the way that you did when you were younger, because you have all these physiological changes that happen. And that at that moment is somewhere where your father-in-law would get into trouble. And it's at that moment where it's kind of a fork in the road. And then you have to decide what ultimately you are going to do for your lifestyle, because the trajectory of aging is, again, very predictable. When you account for that, you can make choices in midlife, which is, optimize for protein, understand the narrative environment that we're in, that beef in America is not bad for the environment. If you care about the environment, you're going to worry about transportation, electricity, and industry, which account for 88% of greenhouse gas and effects on the environment versus, red meat or cattle production and dairy. So it's understanding that the narrative is incorrect. It's understanding that you must optimize for dietary protein, which looks very different than it did when you were younger. And you have to train, and you have to train hard. Yoga and Pilates doesn't cut it anymore. Might be fun, but I mean, if you're into that sort of a thing, but it just doesn't cut it anymore.
Okay. So let's get into optimizing for protein. The current RDA, right, recommended dietary allowance for protein, is set at 0.8 grams per kilogram of body mass. So that's about 0.36 grams per pound. Now, the average American weighs 181 pounds. So that's 65 grams of protein per day.
So brutal.
So you've got about 54 grams of protein in an average size chicken breast. So I was reading your Lyon Protocol 2.0, by the way, great stuff.
Nice.
Now you recommend 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight, which is that's like almost triple the RDA. And that's not even a lot by some standards, right? For those in heavy, intense training. So why the massive differential with the RDA?
The RDA is 0.8 grams per kilogram, which is set, it's a very archaic, and it was done on nitrogen balance studies, and it was done for 18-year-old men. And the way in which it was done, it was during a time when they were looking at soldiers, and it's old. Nobody even uses that anymore, the way in which the number was identified. And arguably new studies have come out saying that it is too low. In fact, one is called the PRODAGE study, and that was for looking at older individuals. And we know that 1.2 to 1.6 grams per kilogram is just baseline for them to maintain some of their health. So that's nearly double the RDA right there as it relates to, quote, aging. And arguably aging begins in your 30s. We are so domesticated as people. You can argue that 1 gram per pound ideal body weight is healthy. And we've never seen studies to say that it's not. Once you get one, and listen, it's on the higher end, an individual could go lower, and that would be certainly satisfactory. There are other benefits beyond just maintaining skeletal muscle. There are benefits for neurotransmitters. There are benefits for, muscle recovery, for hormone production, for any kind of structure in your body, for protein turnover, for organs, for everything. Therefore, when you think about optimizing for protein, and also it's more satiating. When you optimize for protein, we know that metabolic parameters improve. We know that body weight improves. We know that lean muscle mass improves. There's no reason not to do it. Then with the rest of the calories, you can decide if you want carbohydrates or fats. I don't care either way. I tend not to be in either zealot group. Okay. I think that, once we understand that protein, while the most misunderstood macronutrient, is the most important.
Interesting. Okay. So let's get into this, because I'm going to quote here from a paper. So just bear with me, because I want your thoughts on this. So I'm going to quote you. I'm going to quote from a paper written by Mickey Ben-Dor for the Journal of Evolution and Health. The title of the paper is "How Carnivorous Are We? The Implication for Protein Consumption." Now, quote, "In answering the question as to how much protein was consumed in the Paleolithic era, Mickey Ben-Dor points to studies from Shane Billsborough on dietary protein intake, which show that protein processing in humans is limited to 35 to 50% of calories, although no definitive limit is universally accepted. Now, the archaeological record shows that the hunting and food exploitation behaviors of humans in the Paleolithic period can be interpreted as stemming from the need to obtain animal fat. If humans invested so much energy in obtaining fat, it means that they were at the limit of their protein consumption from animals. This limit is approximately 4.4 to 4.6 grams per kilogram of body weight, or 2 grams of protein per pound of body weight. In conclusion, a high consumption of protein and fat and low consumption of plant-sourced food seems to be the human evolutionary status during the Paleolithic. Dr. Lyon, what are your thoughts on this and animals? Because we've talked about protein, right? And animals as the evolutionary source of our protein requirements.
I actually love this question. I've never been asked this before. I've looked at some of the evolutionary papers, and I found them to be very interesting. And there was a change in human evolution as it relates to brain function when we figured out fire in animals. I think that it cannot be denied that animal-based foods are highly nutrient dense. They are some of the most nutrient dense substances in the world that we consume. And I think because of that, we know that you have essential amino acids. You do need dietary protein. And that essential amino acid profile comes from animal-based products. Animals have the amino acid profile necessary to build animals. It's interesting, right? And plants have the necessary amino acid profile to build plants. And I just think it's fascinating. And I will mention one thing. We are starting to see some data come out that the human microbiome plays a role in the flexibility of the individual, which is all very new data. One paper came out in Nature by my mentor, actually, he was one of the co-authors, Dr. Donald Lehman, and it talks about how the gut microbiome can begin to produce some essential amino acids. And that is incredibly profound. It might not be for a lifetime, and it might not be for a couple months. Again, these are rodent studies, but it begs the question, can certain humans actually create from their microbiome essential amino acids? If that in fact turns out to be true, then there is a case perhaps for more vegan vegetarian individuals thriving. Again,
Wow.
It becomes very interesting. And I think as a scientist and as a medical professional, it's incredibly important for me to be open-minded. I cannot certainly know it all. I have been studying this stuff for 17 years, which is a very long time. And I think the better the scientist and the better practitioner you become, the more you are open to hearing other knowledge. The moment I decide that this is one way for everybody and I cannot be open to any more information, then that's the moment, I'm an idiot, right?
Huh.
So that's very fascinating. And I do believe that hunters and gatherers, and during the Paleolithic times, I think that things changed with the season. It makes a lot of sense to me that we would have to hunt and use fire and really use our bodies. And in fact, we probably could get away with less protein because we're moving so much. There's two ways to stimulate muscle protein synthesis, and that's through either exercise, picking heavy things up, putting them down, or it's through dietary protein. We have evolved where we're doing much less movement. And at that time, it makes more sense that we would need to consume more animal-based proteins.
No, it's a very good point. Very, very good point, of course, right? Which is, I guess, lends itself to, if you're doing heavy, intense weight training, more protein, right? Sedentary, don't need as much. But what you just mentioned is fascinating. As you say, if true, and the gut biome can create certain, did you say essential amino acids?
Yes. And this is the paper.
What, like leucine?
Yeah. I mean, we don't know exactly because, again, this is a rodent study, but it's very profound. Essential amino acids that the actual gut microbiome begin to degrade, and that these bugs somehow can make for a period of time. Again, this is all new.
Okay.
Make some essential amino acids, which then changes the entire conversation. And I have some very good friends. I have a very good friend who is a orthopedic surgeon, and she's vegan. And I swear there is roughly 2% of the population that really thrives on this way of eating. Very small, and that's an arbitrary number, but
okay,
it's a very small group that can thrive in this way. And I ultimately believe that it's the way in which their microbiome is just programmed. And listen, someone could say, well, you can change microbiome. Well, sure. But there is a baseline that individuals, you can have a healthy one and unhealthy one, but there is a baseline that individuals have, I believe.
Okay. Very interesting.
Right? So interesting.
But in either case, for those 2% that do thrive on a vegan diet, I would assume though that
all these nutrients, you're still going to miss these nutrients. We're just talking about the essential amino acid. And listen, it's not good for muscle mass. We know that clearly. I worked in geriatrics. We see broken bones all the time. Bone mineral density is low. Dentition is really poor. There's B12 deficiencies. There's anemia. There's all other kinds of issues. But
okay. All right. So we were looking at, that paper by Ben Dorr, protein in the evolutionary sense. Let's now look at something a bit more, looking at, the current view of protein.
Right.
This is from an article in Elsevier. Here's the headline.
Who wrote it?
It's not the article that's important. It's the study, which I'm positive you've heard of.
Okay.
So here's the headline. Controlling protein intake may be key to longevity. Studies show researchers in cell metabolism.
I know exactly. This is so brutal. You know, they never published the rebuttal to this paper.
Okay, so here's the editor. Let me quote this for our audience because
the editor
it's unbelievable.
Was one of the researchers. One of the editors of Cell is one of the researchers on this paper.
Okay. So
did you know that?
Yeah, this is unbelievable. Okay, so hold on. So here's the deal. Let me set the stage. So two groups of researchers publishing in the journal Cell Metabolism.
Which, by the way, if you guys don't know, is it's the top of the line.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. It says that consuming moderate to high levels of animal protein prompts a major increase in cancer risk and mortality in middle-aged adults. The studies found that a high protein, low carbohydrate diet, although it resulted in reduced food intake and body fat, led to a shorter lifespan and poor cardiometabolic health. A low protein, high fat diet, so the ketogenic diet, right, had the most detrimental effects, while a high carbohydrate, low protein diet,
so brutal,
was best. Right. That, I mean, like,
that was stupid. I've had people on stage quote this to me, this paper, by the way.
Okay. So talk about
for those of you guys who don't know. Okay. For those of you guys who don't know, Cell Metabolism, like Lawrence is saying, this is a very prestigious journal. What you guys also don't know is everything needs to be peer reviewed. And maybe you do know this, and I'm making an assumption, but it's peer reviewed by a group of people. The author there's multiple authors on this paper. Well, one of the authors was one of the editors of Cell Metabolism. So this paper gets published. The data was incredibly skewed. The world and dangerous. When you put this kind of information out there, it is absolutely dangerous to humans. They had professional statisticians go through, when I say they, I mean a group of individuals that are highly respected in protein research, go back and had this data reviewed, and they sent it to professional statisticians, and it showed that the data was completely butchered. And in fact, those that had the highest protein in their diet, and these are ad libitum fed rats, had the lowest cancer rates. But they didn't want to tell the narrative. And also the rodent studies, they're all ad libitum fed rats. So they're all obese rats. It's just total BS. And then when the paper came out, the rebuttal was never published. And this was a list of Dr. Donald Lehman, Dr. Von Loon, Heather Leidy, Stu Phillips, just the most well-regarded individuals. And I'll say one more thing. If you look at Klurfeld, if you look at this gentleman named, his last name is Klurfeld, if you look at him and you look at some of his data, he actually sat on the committee, the IR committee for cancer.
Okay.
And he wrote a beautiful paper, and I don't know, it was like, is meat healthy? You guys can Google it. It was a beautiful, I have mom brain, by the way. I have two very little children. I have one, I just came back from maternity leave. Forgive me. You know, I mean, my baby's not even 4 months old.
Wow.
Anyway, so, but of course, when you asked to do this podcast, I had to make sure that we could get it in, and I'm very glad that we did. You interviewed many of my friends, but anyway.
Thank you.
So the data shows that, for example, there's relative risk, and that means the risk of doing something will have a particular outcome. So the relative risk, or the risk ratio of smoking and lung cancer, is 12. In order for something to be considered clinically significant, it must be 2 or more.
Okay.
They did multiple studies to look at this. Even Annals of Internal Medicine, which is also a very high level journal, came out. And do you know what the relative risk of ingesting protein and cancer is?
No idea.
Less is like 1.2.
So
it's not clinically, and it's not clinically significant. And the way in which the data was done was the way in which they evaluate drugs. So it wasn't some obscure way in which the data is created. It was a standardized, it's called the grade system. It's the way that it's used. The question then you have to ask yourself, are the researchers who put the study together in cell metabolism biased? And the answer is yes, they're largely vegan as a group. So it's no surprise that this comes out of their lab. And one must understand that regardless of your training, I am trained in protein metabolism, but I still, if I see a study and there's data that comes out, you have to have mental flexibility. I wouldn't want the listeners to count on me to say, oh, she's always going to say protein is the thing, protein is the thing. I believe in it greatly. I've seen it. I've been studying it for 17 years. And I am also open to the fact that the gut microbiome might have this role in whatever it is. So you see, but there is an integrity issue which is happening. And that integrity issue is these individuals, I believe, and many others believe, knew what they were doing and knew that this was pushing an agenda. And that's exactly what happened. Because I'll say one more thing. The recommended dietary allowance that, you know, what this paper breaks down to be is something like 0.3 grams.
Right. I mean, that's even lower than the RDA.
Exactly. So the RDA is set, you know, for 18-year-old men, and that's supposed to be the baseline for maintaining health. And now you're recommending something lower. I mean, it makes no sense. It is.
And it's like you said, I mean, this is, you know, this is like, I mean, this can be weaponized against a 100%. Human population.
Well, I mean, I suppose if you want to domesticate the planet and make them weak and frail elderly, this is the way to do it.
Oh, okay. All right. We'll come back to this. I want your opinion on this. Here's a survey. Okay. A survey of 8,000 urban Americans in 1909. Right. I want to bring this up. Showed that the poorest among them ate 136 pounds of meat a year, and the wealthiest more than 200 pounds. So most ate somewhere between 150 to 200 pounds of meat per year. Okay. And
by the way, guys, that's not a lot if you think
right?
about how many pounds. I mean, we go through easily 14 pounds in a week, just so you guys think that perspective.
Okay. So I want to quote you now from an article, that article you wrote in the Orlando Sentinel, because you talk about how we eat almost 1/3 less red meat now than we did 40 years ago.
Right, totally.
So if we go back, you know, to the 1800s, you're looking at 150 to 200 pounds a year of red meat. You know, now what is it? I think I saw recently that it was about 220 pounds of meat, not even red meat. Sorry, 220 pounds of meat a year. Okay. So the question is this. You said that Americans now consume 70% of their calories from plant-based foods, right?
So yes, and this is not even me. This is NHANES data set. This is the largest data set.
Okay. So we were consuming about 200 pounds of red meat in the mid 1800s. We're consuming just a little bit more now. Why are we sicker?
I mean, you make up a good point. And, you know, I have to say, I find it remarkable that you are mentally flexible, that you are listening to this narrative that everybody is pushing and going, there's no way that this is right. There's no way.
So why do you think there is such an overwhelming push by the health authorities, by food companies, by policymakers, by scientists, by popular culture in general, Dr. Lyon, at least here in the West, to radically shift the population away from protein and even more so away from meat and move us to a plant-based diet? Why?
I think that there's two components to this.
Okay.
I think the first component is if you want a compliant society, you need individuals to be weak. And I know that sounds conspiracy theorist, but if you want a compliant society, you want soft, weak individuals. The way to do that is to take away things that would make them strong, foods that would make them strong, and completely domesticate them. Okay, right? You want to treat them like cattle, feed them like cattle. That's one aspect.
Okay.
And then the other aspect is there's a ethical superiority. And I think that that's even less of the truth. I think truly I think it's about control. I mean, the concept and the ability to eat animal-based products and the ability to choose and to be strong and to be mentally tough, that's all very scary if you want a group of individuals in a society to be controllable, right? You don't want a group of seals. You don't want a group, and I'm not saying you eat meat and then you're a seal. I truthfully don't know any
Right.
vegan or vegetarian seal, but you take away the things that will allow them to be optimized. And then there's that moral superiority somehow that, I don't think that we should take a life of an animal or something like that, because that's the only two things that's the only two conclusions that I can come up with. I'm curious what your thoughts are.
My thoughts. I'll juxtapose what you just said. Interestingly, over in China, right, a country that we are incredibly competitive with, meat consumption's exploding. Right? Here's a headline in Reuters from just last year. Okay, China's appetite for meat is still growing. Quote: despite the impact of COVID-19 and African swine fever, China's appetite for meat is showing no sign of slowing down. The country is the world's largest consumer of meat by some margin, with citizens expected to eat 40.3 million metric tons of pork in 2020, according to the USDA. To put that figure in context, pork consumption in the country is set to be more than double that of all European Union countries combined. So interesting. As the West becomes domesticated, as we become weak and subservient, look, I agree with you wholeheartedly. It's pretty clear. I think the samurai in feudal Japan outlawed the eating of meat for all citizens except those of the samurai class.
So interesting.
Interesting. So there's no doubt that meat makes humans powerful, and plants. Maybe in 2% people, humans, maybe 2% of humans can thrive. 98% of humans are going to become feeble, broken down, and mentally, they're going to be destroyed over time. So okay. So what's going on? Why in the West, right? But meanwhile, you see China, Hong Kong, right? Meat consumption is being promoted. It is being pushed. It is, no one's pushing a vegetarian diet.
Yeah, because they did that already, I think that's why I'm so vocal about this. It's not because I want to talk about protein all the time, right? Think about it from my perspective. It's exhausting.
Right.
But I have to continue to educate and continue to talk about it. Otherwise, if there's an off chance and individuals are just going to believe the narrative that they're being fed, it's like the mouse with the megaphone, right? You have a couple groups, you've got industry, you've got big pharma, you have Hollywood that are totally going to push the opposite. And if people listen to that, they're going to be completely controlled. And
they will. And, it's important to have, someone such as yourself, who is a doctor, in this camp, because we need medical practitioners on the side of real nutrition. Look, here's another thing I'll bring up. We've been inundated by media, by policymakers and politicians in the medical establishment as to the lengths that we as a society must go in order to mitigate the effects of COVID. And I'm talking about from the economic devastation and personal physical and mental health consequences of prolonged lockdowns,
Yeah.
to the near constant wearing of masks when in public, to the taking of these new vaccines. But yet we hear absolutely nothing about what we can do to protect ourselves nutritionally, right? So here is a study published in, and this is the kind of study you would hope to see in Cell Metabolism, right?
Right.
So here's a study published in Cell Metabolism entitled Association of Blood Glucose Control and Outcomes in Patients with COVID-19 and Pre-Existing Type 2 Diabetes, right? So check this out. This study found a major difference in outcomes between patients with well-controlled blood glucose and poorly controlled blood glucose. The numbers are absolutely just devastating. Patients with type 2 diabetes that were unable to keep their blood sugar under 180 milligrams per deciliter 2 hours after meals were 10 times more likely to die, right? I mean, patients with poorly controlled blood glucose were also far more likely to suffer from major issues, from heart to kidney problems to acute respiratory distress syndrome. So I want to ask you, because you must have, I mean, you must have seen a lot of issues with patients who had COVID, or, you know, it stands to reason that the diet recommended by the publishers of that study in Cell Metabolism that said a low protein, high carbohydrate diet will help you live longer. Well, in this case,
so stupid. Yeah.
So can you talk about your thoughts on how important it might be nutritionally to control blood sugar, as to its impact on the immune function?
Well, not only that, if you get injured, you want to have as much muscle mass as you can, because that's what pulls from your amino acid reservoir. Your muscle, your skeletal muscle tissue is what is going to allow you to survive. Cachexia, cancer, burn patients can't, any of these major injuries, COVID, you do not have enough amino acids stored to protect you. You're going to be crushed. There's no question that body composition, being over fat, having impaired metabolism, having elevated blood glucose is going to kill you faster. In all domains, it's going to kill your brain. If you get COVID, you're in trouble. You're overweight, you've got underlying glucose control issues, you're in trouble, whereas otherwise it might be a little cold, and I think it goes to low-lying, low-grade inflammation over time. Obesity is a risk factor for cancer. No one talks about that. No one says, oh, you should lose weight, because the more adipose tissue you have, the more overweight you are, the more likely you are to get cancer, that it is a risk factor.
Right. What's the, compared to the consumption of meat versus being obese, which is the bigger risk factor for cancer?
I mean, listen, right, exactly. And there's no known risk of eating meat in cancer. And that's why, I think his first name is David Klurfeld said, and if you guys should really read that, you would love that paper.
Okay.
And it talks about the IR committee being a group that they threw out all the high quality studies, and they used epidemiological data, which is very low quality, and that the group was largely vegan and vegetarian, and they had an agenda when they, determined that meat was carcinogenic. This is a real problem. And, getting that from the top down, there is no argument that being obese, they'll say, oh, obesity, but you're metabolically, that they're metabolically healthy obese. That does not make any common sense. It's not even just about the end product markers. It's how's your skeletal muscle tissue? What is this going to look like in another 10 years? I think when people say that it's okay to be obese and that somehow that they're okay because their blood levels are healthy, or, within normal limits, I think that's foolish. I've been seeing patients since 2006. It's a foolish concept. And it requires people taking personal responsibility. And that's not easy, right? So it's much easier for them to put us in lockdowns and give us perks to get vaccinated, like Pizza Hut and all this other stuff, whatever they're doing, than actually being appropriate and proactive and root cause based. I mean,
It's
I don't
incredibly
know.
refreshing to speak to a medical professional such as yourself, a doctor that actually, thinks the way you think. It's so different and so 180 degrees from anything you hear in popular medicine.
Yeah.
Okay. So, it's no surprise that if I'm a Navy SEAL or a Green Beret and I need to figure out, nutritionally what I should be looking at, I'm going to come to someone, I'm going to come to you. So can you talk about the work you do with the special
Yeah,
operations community?
I'd love to.
Love to hear about that.
Obviously I'm married to a SEAL.
Yep.
They're my favorite patient population, them, and actually I take care of their wives. So I tend to take care of the whole.
Interesting.
And that's really important. I do nutrition for them, certainly, but I do more medical care, pre and post deployment. There's all kinds of things that happen. There's all kind of bugs that show up. There's a whole slew of hormonal things that happen.
Mhm.
And, I think knowing the culture very well is extremely important. Extremely important.
So when it comes to the special operations community, how is, whether you're going in and, looking to make it past buds as a Navy SEAL,
Taking care of guys that are going to buds too. Yep.
right? I mean, so, okay, you're great. So
Taking
what,
care of the
what,
whole, the
what,
whole
what you,
group.
what does that look like nutritionally for these individuals?
So the buds guys, if they're prepping for buds or in buds, they are eating as much as they possibly can. It's really interesting. It's not necessarily about the quality of the calories, and you have to understand they're getting it from their own chow hall, and
Okay.
they are just consuming. Typically guys it depends. They can put on weight during buds actually.
Okay.
And part of that is the stress. And then part of that is just constantly moving and doing everything, that they're eating bologna sandwiches, whatever. I mean, that's
Right.
actually what they're eating.
Okay.
But with them, it's really important that their supplement regimen of what they can manage is doable. But the reality is they're either going to be tough enough to get through or they're not. No matter how much ashwagandha I give them, no matter how much vitamin C, they're either tough enough or they're not, period. Their blood work is a complete mess, but it doesn't matter.
Right.
Right? It's a temporary thing, and either the guys are going to cut it or the guys aren't.
So a
So
lot of the guys that,
yeah,
a lot of the guys that I speak to, have come out after 20 years
Yep.
In the special operations community, and they have PTSD, they have TBI,
Mhm.
they suffer with all manner of neurological issues, and that is in the some of the most well known from the special operations community who are out there. But a lot of that stuff is boiling beneath the surface.
All of it.
And
Yeah.
I know certainly speaking with one Delta operator, they changed their whole, a lot of the issues that they were suffering with. They changed a lot of it with nutrition.
Mhm.
Can you talk about the impact that nutrition can make and the kind of nutrition necessary to help those? Forget about going in. Like you said, they're like Michael Phelps, eating whatever they can consume.
Truth. I want to say something because I'm hoping that you have, operators that listen to your show, is
Mhm.
that I have many of them in my practice, whether active duty or retired, and there's this huge cultural stigma against asking for help
Right.
or
True.
assuming
Very
they
true.
feel weak. And I have guys, and listen, I have, SEALs, I have commanders, I've got some of the guys in the highest positions, and it's a cultural thing. And if you guys get that it is a cultural thing, that you don't want to come across as weak, but that it's really important to reach out, and that you shouldn't be drinking 800 milligrams of caffeine a day just to function. You have to understand that they deserve help, and that help is there. Every single operator that I have has sleep apnea. Every single one. makes them really fatigued. It's typically from, it can be from the way in which their neck is, the way that their tongue is. It can be from head trauma, from jumping. So you asked me about nutrition. Nutrition is so important. And during deployment, it's really hard because they're eating what they have and they're eating depending on their location.
Mm-hmm.
But post-deployment and pre-deployment is incredibly important, and understanding that you guys go out, deployment, you pick something up, you bring it home to the family, usually GI bugs, and it really affects your ability to intake nutrients. You got to be tested, you got to be treated, and then really keeping things as clean as you can at home, because those are the variables that you can control. And it depends on what they're doing. If they're doing workups, it all just depends on how active they're being, at that time. But how about this? I still recommend a 1 gram per pound ideal body weight. But again, depending on what their workup is and what they're doing, it tends to be a 1-to-1 ratio of carbohydrates to protein. None of the guys that I have are on a ketogenic diet, or they don't stay on it consistently. None of them, even for brain trauma, because it's a lot to ask of these guys.
Right. That's interesting. I want to get your thoughts on this then, and we'll kind of wrap up with this last question. Well, actually 2 more questions, but your thoughts on this because of what you just mentioned. Mm-hmm. So 20 years ago, DARPA, right, Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, initiated a program called Metabolic Dominance, of which the goal was to enable superior physical and physiological performance by controlling energy metabolism on demand. That's their words. Cool. And they believed that getting into ketosis was the way to achieve this. So I want to fast forward to a headline from a couple of years ago in the Washington Times. Headline, quote, Pentagon eyes ketogenic diet in bid to build more lethal warriors. Mm-hmm. Here's a quote from the article. Ditching carbs may be the key to military success in America's future wars. Top Pentagon officials say research has shown that human bodies in ketosis, right, the goal of the popular and powerful ketogenic diet, can stay underwater for longer periods, making the fat and protein heavy eating plan a potential benefit to military divers.
It's totally true. I mean, that's what's his first name? D'Agostino.
Yes, Dominic
D'Agostino. Yeah. So he has some great research. The reality is, in clinical practice, I know these guys, they don't do it. They don't stick to a ketogenic diet. That's the reality. Right?
Right.
I have 25 active duty SEALs in my practice right now. I'm telling you, not one of them can stick to a ketogenic diet. Not one. While in the lab, while in a controlled environment, does it work? Yes. Okay. Have there been studies that are very effective for brain function and head injury, or brain function and physical fitness? And I think that that's probably some of the dive studies. It's possible that it's some of the dive studies that you're talking about. Yep. Yeah. And if you know these guys personally, not for 1 second that they're going to be doing that. It just doesn't happen.
Which is why they've been, I think they figured it out. Well, we know it's been figured out. They were, because I guess, and although they never said this, obviously, as Stan Efferding says, compliance is the science. But if you can't comply with it, it doesn't matter. But the research that was done in that DARPA program led to the creation of the first exogenous ketone ester.
Really cool. I had no idea. I would love to see that. Maybe you can message me that. That would be so.
Yeah. In fact, there's a company that manufactures it, and that ketone ester is what now, because I guess, again, if you can't comply with it, then what they can do is they can give you this exogenous ketone, and you can get that performance benefit out of it.
I trialed that. I had a Indy race car driver, and I trialed that, and he felt terrible.
Well, there you go.
Again, there's that, the research base and the clinical practice. And I really think that that's where my special sauce is, because I can share with you guys, certainly what the research shows, but then actually seeing patients makes it a whole different ballgame.
Yeah. And so this is the difference between you and, a lot of, professors and knowledge and those that are very knowledgeable about medicine, is that you're in incredible shape. Again, you competed.
I don't know how incredible, but yeah.
The point is, you are in fantastic shape. You've competed, you don't just understand it, but you also understand how to put it into practice, which I think will give your patients a lot of confidence that, because you know, the old, you go to a doctor, he tells you to quit smoking and he's smoking, right? He's obese,
Totally.
he's overweight, he doesn't care about his health, right?
Right.
So we'll end with this. Where can those that are interested in what you do and how you can help, where can they find you? How do they get in touch? How do you become a patient?
So the paid now depends. Well, first of all, you can go to my website that has everything, all the information. I am going to be launching some mentorship programs, which will be a monthly mentorship. And I say mentorship, it'll be challenge, it'll be nutrition, medicine, mindset, because that is all key in optimizing one's health. So those will be launching in September. I don't know when this comes out, in September 2021. You can go to my website, check that out. And that's Dr. Gabrielle Lyon. I'm very active on Instagram. Also, same name, Dr. Gabrielle Lyon. And I have a YouTube channel in which I will be doing more. I'm just back from maternity leave, but I have a YouTube channel that has a ton of videos. I have a great newsletter, and the newsletter is refined. It's quick. I write it all. I am not one of the physicians that outsources to a team to write. I do all my own writing. All my content is original. And I think it's really useful for you guys. So I curate newsletter, and it has studies that I'm reading, and it has a video. It'll have the Alpha Human podcast when it comes out, all that kind of stuff.
That's great. I signed up to it, so I'm getting it now. I'm starting to see it. Amazing. Dr. Lyon, thank you so much for doing the show.
Sure.
It's fascinating to talk to you, but it's also incredibly refreshing to know that there are a few incredible doctors out there like yourself whose message is powerful and it resonates. And again, you know, I know that if I needed help, I know where to go, and I can have that confidence. So
yeah. Oh, let me say one more thing. If you are a special operator and you need me, you can reach out. They can email, or if you're interested in becoming a patient, it is a very rigorous application process. You will go through someone on my team. They can email peter@drgabriellelyon.com. If you are an operator, then that is a whole different ballgame. I really try my very best to make sure that you are taken into the practice, or at least put to, whether it's Task Force Dagger or the group that you need to be with to get help, because
that's amazing. Absolutely fantastic. Dr. Lyon, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Okay.
Bye-bye.